Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to episode number 55 of IABC's Circle of Fellows. This is a monthly conversation where a group of fellows get together to talk about a topic of interest to organizational communicators. And we have a special episode today. Roger Dupree is with us, the author of this book. Everybody hold up your copy.
Mine's in that bookcase behind.
Yeah, we can see the spine, Jim. Excellent book. I've already read it, and I've already given a copy to my boss. Not that she needs it, but we are working on this issue in our organization, and I thought there was some really good stuff in here that we could apply. So, as I say, we're going to be with you for the next hour, talking about bosses, true stories of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I ready to take your questions. You can share your questions either by using the hashtag COF55 on Twitter, or if you're watching on YouTube, just use the comment field right there in YouTube, and we'll be able to answer your questions and share your observations. And with that, let's go around the screen and have you all introduce yourselves. Jim, let's start with you.
Okay, I'm Jim Shaffer. I'm based in Annapolis, Maryland. I am the leader of the Jim Shaffer Group. We help improve business results in areas such as quality, service, cost, speed, productivity by strengthening leadership and generating excited, turned-on employees.
Excellent. And Stacy.
I'm Stacy Wilson. I'm based in Denver, where it's snowing right now. And I'm president of Elocore Consulting. We focus strictly on internal consulting with a heavy emphasis in helping organizations better leverage their technology for communication and collaboration.
Great to see you, Stacy. Angela.
I'm Angela Sinickas, CEO of Sinickas Communications, and it kind of doesn't matter where I'm based, although I am based outside of Las Vegas these days, but we do research for corporate communicators, research and measurement to sort of give them evidence that they can use when they're making the recommendations to management. It's not just my opinion versus your opinion, which is usually the issue with bosses, but some evidence brought into the conversation to make things a little more objective.
Great. As always, great to see you, Angela. I'm Shel Holtz, by the way. I am Director of Internal Communications at WebCore, which is a commercial general contractor in San Francisco. And in just 1 second, I'll ask Roger to introduce himself. But I do want to mention that you might think that we would be here talking about coronavirus with everything that's going on. I have been in 3 webinars in the last week dedicated to that. There is a glut of content out there now. So I hope this is a tonic, something else to talk about and distract you for a few moments. We are going to be talking about bosses. And Roger, that's your cue. And Roger's only with us by audio, but Roger, tell us about yourself.
I'm Roger Dupree. I'm here in Rochester, New York, and I had Dupree and Company, LLC. I have to comment that in the midst of all this communication about the virus, it's hard to get this subject into proper perspective, but this too will end, and the issue that we're looking at today will certainly continue to be an issue.
It will. And I think, it's interesting. One of the things that I was doing this week was sharing with managers at our company tips for managing remote workers. The quality of your bosshood, I think, is an issue in this crisis in the workplace. Yeah. So, Roger, what led you to write this book?
I would say the answer to that is that this is a subject that I've been fascinated with for my entire career. And this is the book I've always wanted to write because my belief is that the relationship between boss and the people that they're responsible for is the most critical leadership relationship in any organization. And so I've always been intrigued by the impact of the boss on morale, on engagement, on productivity, on all of the important issues that go to create a productive work organization. So that's where I started. And I think that people in the workplace for years and years have, lived with a boss situation based on authority, loyalty, and discipline. And things have changed, obviously, radically in both the workplace and among the members of the workforce. I would venture to say we probably have the most talented workforce since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, mostly as a result of digital technology and the digital age. And this is a group of people who need to be led far differently from the old approach of authority, loyalty, and discipline. The notion that I am the boss, I have authority over you, and you must do what I say. In that process, you must also be loyal to me personally, and I have the right to, in some fashion, penalize or punish you. That was sort of the paradigm we have lived by all these years up to the present. So all of those things put together persuaded me that this was a time to write this book.
Okay, and it's obviously not the only book on this topic. I've also got this from Gallup. It's the Manager, with the unwieldy subtitle, Gallup finds that the quality of managers and team leaders is the single biggest factor in your organization's long-term success, which is almost a chapter in its own right. But
yeah,
let's go around with the panel. And by the way, I should mention that Bish Mukherjee is also supposed to be joining us. There may have been a time zone confusion, but we'll pop him in if he shows up. But let's go around. Angela, starting with you, what was your biggest takeaway from this book? What really leapt out at you as a lesson?
Well, first, it was just really interesting reading other people's good and bad boss stories. In addition to my own, it just seems to be so prevalent everywhere. But one of the things that I took away from this, because I do research, one of the things Roger has in the back of the book is a questionnaire. So you can rate your supervisor on it, and you can also rate yourself on it. Because I think one of the biggest issues is self-awareness. There are some bosses that truly believe that they're there to punish bad people and use their power in a very heavy-handed way. But a lot of people are bad bosses just because they don't know better. Roger mentions training is so important, and it absolutely is. But if they don't have that self-awareness that something could be better to start with, they wouldn't even pay attention to the training. So I think that was one of the big takeaways for me.
I think one of the things that I told Roger when I first read the book is, I looked back. I was sitting in my office here reading it, and I looked back at that bookcase behind you. In that bookcase, there's probably 25 books on leadership in one form or another, among other kinds of subjects as well. But one of the things that I said to Roger is, I picked up the book and I just grabbed it and I said, but it's all right here. And what Roger has done is he's gone back in history, and he's brought forward the kinds of things that we were talking about a number of years ago and that still apply. He's also talking about the kinds of things that are very contemporary. What does it take to communicate successfully through what you say and what you do? How do you get skilled up as a leader? How do you use your time in such a way that you signal what's important and you take the lead on, and the other kinds of things that are so important about leadership? So I think the thing that I liked the most about it, and it would be the book that if somebody said, do you have a good book on leadership? I have a lot of them, but read this one and you've got it.
Yeah, Stacy, how about you? What did you walk away with?
I'll sort of follow on a couple of comments that both Angela and Jim made. One is just that it's so prevalent. It's so common that I think sometimes sort of disregard the problem. In particular, I think leaders in larger organizations tend to disregard the problem. And then to Jim's point about it's all right here, right? We know how to help those leaders and guide them in creating a better situation and experience for both themselves and their employees. But it's not intuitive. And so that's something that struck me with a lot of the stories, it's just not intuitive for a leader necessarily. Those intuitive leaders are pretty rare, who come out of the gate and do this really, really well. The rest of them have to put in some time and energy to be great at that. And unfortunately, a lot of them just don't.
One of the issues, and I have always believed this, is that people are not promoted or hired into a position as a manager based on their ability to manage. Right. It's usually when it's a promotion into a manager position that they've hit the ceiling of their pay scale. The next level up, if we're going to continue to reward you and move you up, means you have to have people reporting to you. But it is your work at your skills that have led to that promotion. And there's not a lot of effort to prepare these people to become managers beyond the administrative side, the paperwork that you have to file and the bureaucracy that you have to engage in at that level. I wonder how you all feel about the prospects for organizations actually hiring managers or promoting managers based on the likelihood that they're going to be good managers as opposed to good practitioners of their skill sets.
Shel, to that point, you mentioned Gallup earlier. According to their research, senior leaders pick the wrong candidates to be bosses 82% of the time.
Yeah.
That's 8 times out of 10, which I think is reinforces your point that the selection issue is critical here. They also estimate that only 10% of the population has the skills to lead. And so clearly we have to identify that 10% and make sure that those are the people who get chosen to be bosses in the first place.
And Bish is here. Before we go on, Bish has joined us. Hi, Bish. Hello, Bish.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Why don't we're going to take a break from what we were talking about so you can introduce yourself.
This is Bish Mukherjee, and I am a consultant and advisor to various companies. I have done work in a few countries, including Australia and India. Currently, I'm working out of India.
Great to have you with us. So, Angela, go ahead. You were saying?
I think one of the worst situations is what you're describing, Shel, when someone's being promoted from a group of people to suddenly become their boss. Because even beyond not having training, somehow in their minds, I think they have to now distance themselves from those people. They're got to show that they're better than those people. They know more than those people. And so all the worst things about being a bad boss are really coming out because they don't know any better. They think that's how they show that they're the boss.
I think I completely agree with you. I think that what we're talking about is by far the majority of so-called leaders out there. But what is it that turns a company into a leadership engine, as I refer to them? And I'm talking about the IBMs, the FedExes, the 3Ms, the P&Gs, and those others who year after year are selected as one of the top leading organizations. But why is it that doesn't catch on, Roger, more with other organizations? Is it just because we can get away with it?
Well, I think the organizations you just mentioned tend to have superior cultures.
Yeah,
and
so too.
As a consequence of that, it's more natural for people to lead in an enlightened fashion. So I think that's a head start. That's a big help. And they tend to be more careful in their selection, I would argue.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're also more explicit on what they're expecting from managers.
Yes.
Remember, I was doing 2 communication audits at the same time with 2 different companies. And one of the questions we were asking of leaders was, what do you expect your supervisors, managers to do in the way they communicate with people? And we asked managers and supervisors, what do you think leadership expects of you in terms of communication? And in one company, it was an oil company, it was absolutely explicitly the same. There were 3 things that leaders expected of communication by those manager levels, and they all quoted all 3 of those things. The other one was completely the opposite. The senior leadership said, what we expect is for them to tell those difficult messages to people, deal with those really hard issues. And what did supervisors and managers think management expected? To sugarcoat everything, make everything sound nice.
Yeah.
So I think that's really what makes that culture, is the explicitness of what we're expecting, and hopefully training to back it up, but at least letting them know what's expected.
A lot of managers don't think they have permission to communicate, which is intriguing, that somehow their job is, as you say, to sugarcoat.
Well, let me show you a chart that I use a lot when I'm talking about managers and communication. This is a survey that was conducted a few years ago. 616 managers surveyed by the Harris poll. And 69% say they're uncomfortable communicating with employees in general. And then you can see the breakout of specific kinds of communication that they're uncomfortable with, giving direct feedback and criticism about performance that the employee might respond badly to, which, I mean, giving feedback is one of the primary roles of a manager. In fact, we're at WebCore, we're very focused on managers as coaches. Our CEO has said that he remembers the construction business when a good day was one where you didn't get yelled at. There's a clear shift, not just in what managers ought to be doing, but what employees, millennial employees in particular, expect of managers as mentors and coaches and the like, but also demonstrating vulnerability, recognizing employee achievement, and recognition, of course, is a huge intrinsic driver of employee behavior. Delivering the company line. In my organization, when we did the internal communications survey, we found that employees thought the senior leadership communicated very well, and their managers, they heard crickets from when it came to how does the strategic plan relate to us? How do the values relate to us? How does the mission and the purpose and all of this relate to us? Giving clear directions, crediting others with good ideas, and speaking face to face rather than by email. That's all fairly disturbing that managers are uncomfortable with that. Roger, why do you think that is?
I think it's simply a matter of they haven't been prepared. As Angela just pointed out, they don't really understand the role in the first place. And so why would you, as a boss, focus on some of the things we expect of them when you've never been trained to do it? Only 33% of managers get any kind of communication or leadership training. That's an appalling percentage.
Well,
I think under those circumstances, why would you be inclined to do things that make you completely uncomfortable?
I agree with you, Roger, about the training. I think that there's another big piece of it, and I saw the companies that I mentioned earlier are all ones that I have consulted to. But the one in particular, FedEx, I think Fred Smith is one of the best leaders I've worked with. But one of the things that they have is they have 4 or 5 statements, and those 4 statements are, this is what our expectation of leaders is. And they not only have that, but they also are facilitating through learning and development and the reward and recognition system, and they mean it. If somebody doesn't live those four items, they don't get rewarded to the extent that those who do live those characteristics.
Yeah, and I
So-
think that points up the whole issue of accountability and its importance. I think that's one of the great gaps in all of this. People are not held accountable for their behavior and for their effectiveness as managers.
Hmm.
Bish, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was sort of interested in the chart that you showed. That's very interesting. That 69% of the people don't are uncomfortable communicating down. That is where the culture element that earlier Jim and Roger talked about comes in, and a little bit of what Angela said too. It's the better companies doing it in a better way, in the sense that if it is a multinational company with, say, 80 branches across the world, they have a culture, they have a set pattern of communication already identified at the headquarters, and they send it down the line to all the branches. And when the communications guy at any of these branches takes on those charges, he is already aware of what the needs are of the company. So that sort of training that we were talking about isn't really required for the guys at these corporate ends where the branches are concerned or the countries are concerned. But yes, at the headquarter level, it's a different issue, and there the training needs to be done. But the benefit of having that sort of very very customized, focused communication schedules which are available to the employees or to the managers, the communication people, the professionals, it's a very big asset. And I have come across so many examples, like when I was working with Colgate-Palmolive, and I was the India head for communications then. It made my job much easier when I discussed things over with my communications director in New York. And he would tell me some things which I would have thought about and spent a lot of time trying to figure out a new way of doing it. So these are the benefits of having a big company with big ideas and big gains there.
Roger, I'd like to come back to the idea of accountability. If, for example, communication is added as a percentage of the score that you get in your performance evaluation, it's not going to be a large one. You're going to be held accountable for production and profitability, and those are going to be the lion's share. And a manager who's uncomfortable communicating is going to look at that and say, okay, I'm going to get dinged 10% on communication, but as long as I get my 90% on achieving business goals, I'm still going to get a good bonus. How do we hold managers accountable in a way that makes them or inspires them to feel like this is something that they really do need to take seriously?
I think you need to make them equal. I was with Jack Welch, the late Jack Welch, at Crotonville, which was at that time was their leadership development place. And one of the things that he told the group I was with, about 5 or 6 people, he said, we reward people, leaders at the highest level. We reward them not only how much they make and they hit their dollars, but how did they do it? And that's where we put that leadership factor in there. He said, the worst mistake I have made here at GE is the time that the guy made his numbers, but he didn't do it well. He got his pay, and everybody was upset about it because Jack Welch was not behaving the way he said that we ought to behave. He said, that's the last time I will ever do that. And so from that point on, there was almost a 50-50% for doing it the right way and making money.
So,
Yeah, can I tell you a story from Xerox long ago in the 70s and 80s? We used to have what I guess you would call an attitude survey today. And as a manager of, say, more than 10 people, you received a red, yellow, or green rating when you were when your numbers were compared to company norms. Clearly, if you were red, this was a problem. And so the goal of most managers became to get a green rating. More than that, if you ran 2 surveys like that in a row and you were red for 2 consecutive surveys, the likelihood was you would be removed from your position as a manager. Now, that was a crucial message about accountability. The other part of this, the good news is the green managers always had the best results, best financials, best attitude survey results, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's the kind of accountability that really makes a difference.
Yeah,
except with a bad boss, it really hurts because they'll tell their employees, if you don't give me a good rating, I'm going to punish you all. And so I've seen the bad managers use that completely for the opposite purpose.
Well, that's a critical point.
So what part of what we're talking about, and we've covered kind of all these things, but I tend to think of this issue around manager communication as a 4-part strategy. The first we talked about is hiring for the skill set. The second, training. The third, which we haven't really talked about yet, is equipping them on an ongoing basis with the tools and resources that they need. And I think we should come back and talk a little bit about that. And then the final one, which we're talking about right now, is measurement. But all of those 4 things assume that the organization overall values communication enough to actually pay attention to any one of those 4. And I think that is an underlying problem in a lot of organizations. You know, Jim, you've talked about some of the ones who do it really well, but the majority don't value it enough to even start thinking about any of those 4 needs. And so until we can get them there, it's very difficult. We might get them to do some measurement, we might get them to do some training, but that's about it. So I'm interested to also hear about, you know, how do we go about getting those organizations to just value communication in the first place so we can start moving them in the right direction?
You talk about training, and I do want to come back to tools and resources. I think that's a great topic. How do you do the training so it's not a snapshot in time? I've seen a lot of manager training programs that communications departments working with learning and development have sort of foisted on managers, and they all come to a classroom and they're all there for a day and they get the notebook and they go back to their offices, and for a week or 2 they're practicing this stuff, most of them, and then it just fades and they find themselves right back where they were before, or their employees find themselves right back where they were before. How do you do this in a way that has some continuity to it so that they don't lose the enthusiasm for good manager communication?
Well, I think one of the things that I see with some of the companies that I mentioned earlier is that this is not about training. This is about a learning organization, and you're going to be expected to be learning every single day. And so it's not, we're going to send you out to, pull, what was it? Remember the ones where people were going out and do the ropes courses? They'd go out and splash into the water and come back. And,
right.
well,
Team building.
We're great leaders now, and everything's fine, except nobody paid attention to it. They just laughed and said, hey, that was really fun diving into the cold water. But it didn't stick because, one, they weren't being held accountable for it. Learning wasn't continuous. It was event related.
And I also have to add that my view of team building is that what you're doing out there does not have a parallel back in the work world. That you can figure out how to cross a river together. It's not going to get you through a crisis in the office.
But Shel, this is also exactly where that issue of tools and resources comes in, because if you are reinforcing constantly with tools and resources and opportunities for managers to talk to each other and learn from each other and use those tools and resources every day, then the training, whatever training you did, doesn't remain that one day experience and then go away. So that's why that ongoing support and injection of additional tools and resources, and again, this opportunity for them to talk to each other is just so important, so they can reinforce with each other. And the really great leaders, the ones who can really communicate effectively, can help to teach others as well.
Can I just give you an example of that, how it worked really well? Because when I was back in the corporate world, with one of our companies, we wanted to do some communication training because they really hadn't had much, but we didn't want to do the formal, take them away, as you said, for a day, and then they've got it. We started by asking all of them what were the communication skills they were most concerned about for themselves. And we came up with a list of 42 different skills, which totally flabbergasted us. But then we put that into a survey and we asked people by name to identify which of those skills they thought they were pretty good at and which ones they really needed the most help with. And then we used that so that every month when the managers were getting together in different places, we would have just a little bit of professional guidance on how to do a certain type of skill. But most of it was led by the people who had self-identified as having some good ideas on how to do this in the very same jobs the other people had. So it was peer-to-peer best practice sharing more than anything else. And it was embedded now in the way they did their monthly meetings. So it was continuous. And I wish I could say it was my idea. It wasn't. I helped support it, but it was brilliant. It really worked.
I think these standalone efforts to improve leadership in organizations simply don't work. I think what's required is an initiative that comes from the top, that is based on the passion that a leader feels, a CEO, other staff members, really create and manage together a total initiative that focuses on leadership as a critical part of what happens in an organization. And I think where that does happen, Pfizer, for example, has worked very hard on this. It's an overall issue for the whole company. QVC, one of my clients, has done the same thing in creating what they call a culture of leadership. So I think it's that kind of massive initiative that really has to be launched in order to deal with this.
Absolutely. It can't be a program.
Yeah.
I was trying to share this screen, so let me see if I can manage this again. This is our intranet at WebCore, and this is just one of the things that we're doing to try to elevate the capabilities of managers, and I think we can use this as a launching point for a discussion of tools and resources. Among the things that are in here is a leader's blog, and I want to share one thing with you here. Share a post here. Most of the posts in this blog are written by either me or people in the HR department. But on two occasions, I heard stories of managers who were doing really, really great and innovative things. And so I interviewed them. I wrote the post, got their permission to share it under their name. And they're the two most widely read posts in the history of this blog, which suggests to me that managers will listen more to their peers than they necessarily will to HR or the training department. I wonder, Stacy, when you talk about tools and resources, how much are the people who are doing it well in an organization a valid and valuable tool and resource?
Oh, absolutely. Huge opportunity. And part of that is because we like inherently to learn from people we know. So within the organization, if we can identify those folks who really are skilled and successful, harness their information and get them to really engage on it. And most of those types of folks will do that because they are inherently teachers. So they like to share their skill set and help others. So It's rare for me to run into one of them who's communicating effectively and doesn't want to help. So I think that's a huge, huge opportunity that most organizations are kind of missing to leverage the skill set that they already have in-house. And sometimes part of it is just that they haven't identified who those folks are.
Bish, I'm wondering if there are significant cultural differences in the way people managed. You've worked around the world. Do you detect a serious difference in management styles, or the seriousness with which managers take their role as managers in different cultures?
Absolutely. No question about that. Culture dictates our behavior, and in a country where the culture is very professional and very much sort of laid down in the sense that everything is written down and codified, so you know where to go when you have a problem in your communication challenges. Now, on the contrary, if you go to a country where the culture in communication is a bit lax or not professional as you might think it is in the US or Canada or in Australia, there you tend to get to work with a set of people who will promise you the world. They'll say, oh, this is the problem, we'll do it. And they'll give you a deadline. Okay, we'll do it like in 4 days. You wait for 4 days and nothing happens, you know. And then you remind them on the 5th day, hey, what happened to these programs? And they'll say, oh, I'm sure we'll do it within a day or two. So that sort of commitment that you get in advanced countries, to some extent they are lacking. That sort of commitment is lacking in countries of the developing nations. So that is a huge difference, and it is very difficult to work sometimes when you are yourself ingrained into a thoroughly professional mode, and you want that professionalism to reflect on your staff. So that's a very big challenge. Now, I just wanted to touch on Stacy's mentioning the training and training tools and stuff. That is a very, very important area that we have been talking about. I really believe that the higher the training, the better the training, the more accountable a person becomes. And that communicator who is very accountable will also go in for a look at the bottom line of the company. So I was judging these entries for the Gold Quill Blue Ribbon panel, and I was seeing entry after entry, believe me or not, very nice projects, very well explained, very well planned out. But at the end of it, when you sit back and ask yourself the question, hey, does that have any link with the company's bottom line? And you suddenly start thinking that, oh, maybe they haven't thought about that. So, that sort of situation comes up in cases where the communication professional who is heading the organization is not that committed to accountability. And as Jim said, there's a 50-50 situation there. And I would rather say that the accountability to the bottom line would go even more than 50%.
Mm-hmm.
Roger, the approach you took to this book was having a bunch of people that tell their stories. Wondering what you thought were the best or most telling stories that you received from people who shared those.
Yeah, what was interesting was the variety of stories, and what tended to interest me were the bad examples.
Yes.
because I think some of them were sort of entertaining. I'd ask Stacy to tell her cotton pants story at some point, and Jim to talk about the manager who turned up the heat in the conference room because he was upset with what people were saying about the company. Those things intrigued me, but obviously more to the point were the exemplars, the ones who in large and small ways encouraged people, recognized people, got them to take risks that they otherwise would not take. And I think as you knit all the stories together, what really comes through is the powerful impact of the boss on performance, as I said earlier, on morale and on engagement. Stacy, could I ask you to tell that story? Sure.
So this really, I think, exemplifies why I wound up leaving the organization. The CEO decided, and this was in actually my last week with the organization, decided that because he didn't like khakis, he was going to ban the wearing of cotton pants in the office. And I was working in the headquarters organization for a 77,000 employee company. And I was not allowed to have an audience with him to ask him questions that I think would have caused him to pause and think a little harder about his new policy. Questions like, how would you police this? And are you going to provide some sort of subsidy for employees to purchase clothing with more acceptable fibers? And you know, just in my head, I had the image of the clothing police walking down, asking to see the tags on people's clothing. Yeah, I think if we'd been able to have that conversation, I think he would have definitely rethought his announcement. But the next day, it went out, and then it hit the front page of the local newspaper, which is a well-respected newspaper nationally. And yes, it was really an embarrassment for the organization. And I left Friday. That week was my last day, and he had to retract that the next week and turn that policy around because it was just untenable. It wasn't something that could logically be done in the organization. So I think there were a couple of outcomes from that for me really were sort of representative of why I left the organization. One of them is not providing access to the very senior levels of the organization for the person responsible for employee communication. It was a situation that was just not reasonable, in my opinion, for me to be responsible to all of the employees, but not have access to the top level. And then secondly, just not really taking the employee experience seriously, not understanding the employee experience on a day-to-day basis, and being able to make good decisions based upon that, because they really were not interested in asking questions of employees. So yeah, some important takeaways from that.
And Roger, were you going to ask Jim about his?
Yeah, I was.
Well, go ahead. Ask me.
Yeah, I'm asking.
I was doing some work with Sarah Lee based in Chicago, and my client and I were trying to identify a bakery location somewhere in the Midwest. We could run one of the pilots that we have been running for some time. So we had to find just exactly the right place. And we got up into Milwaukee, and we met at the Sarah Lee Bakery there just outside of Milwaukee. And we went into a conference room and we sat down, and there were probably 8 or 9 people in the room. And what we were there to do is explaining what we were going to do and how we were going to go about it. And you could see some edginess on the part of some of the employees as it related to the boss that was sitting in the room at the end of the table or at the head of the table. And as he got into, well, what do you think about this and what do you think about that? There started to be a little bit of edginess and bickering between the boss and the 7 or 8 people sitting there. And there was one person who said, and I can't remember what his first name was, but he says, it's really warm in here. Can we go someplace else where it's a little more comfortable and we can have a more relaxed conversation? And he said, no, let's just try to get it done as much as we can now. Well, pretty soon he got to the point where he leaned over to my client. She was at the other end of the table next to him. And he says, if they think it's hot, I'll show them what's hot. And so he ended the meeting, and she and I, with the employees, sat around and continued to talk about, here's what we would do at some kind of a pilot, and here's what would be involved. And all of a sudden somebody said, does anybody feel like it's getting warmer and warmer in this room? Well, I was noticing it. I broke out in a sweat, and other people were nodding their head. And one person said, that son of a bitch, I bet he's in the basement turning that heat up. And everybody looked at each other and nodded their head. And I looked at it like, I can't believe anybody would do something like that. Well, it turned out that's exactly what he did. He punished people on a regular basis. And this was a summer day in Milwaukee, just outside of Milwaukee. But he punished people by going down to the basement and turning the heat up if he didn't like something that someone was doing. It was absolutely outrageous. We ended up obviously not using that as our pilot place, but we got the hell out of there very, very fast.
That's a good one.
Roger, an earlier book you wrote was one of the most influential books for me in my career, Communicating for Change. Not to be confused with Communicating Change by T.J. Larkin. But in Larkin's book, he makes the point that the only person who matters communicating to employees during a period of change is the immediate supervisor. I dispute that. I think the immediate supervisor, of course, is vital, but people want to be led by leaders who lead, and hearing about the vision from the top, I think, is very important. But talking about that immediate supervisor, what leadership or management characteristics do you think, based on your experience and what you wrote in Communicating for Change, are most important for managers to convey?
I think the single most important thing is for them to talk in terms of what this all means for the people that they're managing. And I think that's the great gap in times of crisis, because senior leaders tend to talk in terms of that are more abstract, that are more related to large business issues. When people who are experiencing all of this, their ultimate question is, what does all this mean to me? How's it going to affect my life? And that's a question that seldom, if ever, gets answered, partly because the manager doesn't have the information he or she needs to respond to those questions and those fears. And so in time of crisis, I think it's absolutely critical for there to be a coherent message from the top, but at the same time, for bosses, leaders, managers, whatever you want to call them, to be given the information they need to relay to the people who are asking them urgent questions. And more than that, to be given permission to be candid about what it all means, instead of just simply reassuring people or simply parroting what the leadership has said. So it's not an easy task by any means, because it requires honesty at all levels of the organization. And sometimes senior leaders don't want to deliver bad news. A lot of the times they don't want to do it. And so I think it's that combination of things.
I agree, Roger. I want to tell one other story. I was doing some work with Irv Hockaday, who at that time was president of Hallmark Cards in Kansas City. And I had met him earlier, and then we were going to be meeting with the communication people, about 25 people, in a very large conference room. And he spoke for about 15 or 20 minutes about where we were in business process reengineering, which was part of the reason I was there. Also about the vision of the future, what it's going to look, what we want it to look like at Hallmark, and then the strategy. That's how we're going to get there. And he talked, as I say, for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And then at the end, he said, well, that was my message to you all. Let's see. Do you mind if we have a little Q&A here? And they all said, oh, yes, that's fine. He said, okay, my first question is, what can I do to make you the absolute best you can be? What can I do to help you become even better? And they talked about various things for about 10 or 15 minutes. He said, well, the second thing I want to ask about is, what are our customers saying to us out there? What are they talking about? And they had a conversation about the customers. And then he says, are we coming down too hard on these processes that we're re-engineering? Is it getting in your way? And they said, no, it's not getting in our way. It's absolutely great. This is exactly what we need. And then he said, okay, well, thank you very much for, excuse me, do you have any questions of me? And then he went into the questions with the employees. Now, that is a reversal of what most CEOs do, but boy, that was a wonderful technique. I have used that as a learning opportunity for leaders who I've worked with. It just was incredible because those people felt like they were on equal footing with this guy, and they were.
Talking about the ability to share with your direct reports what change is going to mean to them. I see two layers to that. One is what it's going to mean to the team. How are things going to be different for us? But in terms of how it's going to be different for each individual, you have to know something about each of those individuals, right? This is where I think those one-on-one conversations play such an important role for the leader to actually get to know the personal side of the people in their team so that they can help those people navigate what change is going to mean to them personally. Stacy, you raised the issue of tools and resources. I mean, what kind of tools and resources can we put in place for managers that will help them when they're uncomfortable meeting one-on-one with those employees to begin with?
So one of the things that we try to do is to provide tools that prompt strategic thinking. So, we don't assume that those frontline or mid-level managers are going to intuitively know how to think strategically about their communication with their direct reports. So we may use questions, just like Jim was demonstrating with his example. Provide questions for those managers to use instead of expecting them to come up with the questions on their own. We may also provide them with some talking points, things that are important for them to get across. I think the important thing is to differentiate between situations where you want them to have dialogue with their teams versus a situation where they just need to get the important information out. The dialogue I encourage all the time because it's really important for comprehension and retention. So if we can create an opportunity for dialogue, the employees are going to remember and be able to react and respond more appropriately than if they just simply hear talking points. So it's important to kind of understand what the situation is, what is required for the individual topic, what's the context that we're communicating in, and never assume that the manager has the ability to come up with the right questions on their own.
Can I add on to what you said? It's a very interesting and important thing, trying to know people very well down the line and up the ladder as well. There was this CEO who was appointed at a very big package in a company which is a very big company in Canada. And after being appointed the CEO, he got too busy for whatever reasons that he could not meet 95 senior-most managers that he had reporting to him. And this went on for 18 months. Sales started plummeting. And then they realized that something was going amiss. Therefore, we should do something. And they called an event organizer and said, okay, let's do a 2-day seminar where all these people should be called in and I will address them. And so the CEO goes and addresses these 95 people. And then he tells them, okay, from tomorrow onwards, you can take appointments and come and see me personally one by one over the next 2 months. Now, this is the passion, in quotes, with which he approached the topic of knowing people within his organization. On the contrary, I'll give you another example of another chairman and CEO that I worked for. And he found that he told me that, okay, we don't have a vision statement. We don't have mission statements for the various departments. We should have them. And whatever communicating we are doing, we should percolate down the line to the last employee. So what we did these town hall meetings in every single office and factory premises of that company and met thousands of people and asked them to tell us what they wanted from the company. And we put all these together and we formed our company's vision and mission statements. And people were so happy that HR, when they went back to meet them, they got a lot of good words for the chairman, they got a lot of good words for the company, and we got this extremely good feedback.
Well, we have about 3 minutes left, and I have a little wrap up to do when we're done, but I'd like to go around real quickly and just get your top recommendation for communicators in organizations about what they can do to support managers in their efforts to be the kind of managers that I think the book is trying to guide people to. Angela, why don't we start with you? Top recommendation for communicators.
Well, it's going to involve research, and it's an example from one of our companies where we had a problem with customer service, and we identified the reason for it was that managers were just horrible to their employees. So we actually had every level of employees evaluate them at any level above them they had contact with on different communication skills. And here's how we used it. The senior VP of the region first had to share his results with his direct reports and talk about how he was going to change what he was doing. Then he said, now here's your results. You have to do the same thing with the people who report to you. So this changed the culture from the top, as Jim was talking about and Roger. But here's the other thing. We had a couple of managers, one in specific, who said, you're asking the animals at the zoo to evaluate the zookeepers. That tells you what the culture was like there. He left and he went to the competition, which was doubly good. But so I think if you use that kind of evaluation and have managers cascade that process down, you can start making a huge difference in the true culture at every level quickly.
Great. Stacy.
Well, since Angela covered off on the measurement piece, which I think is really important both early and later. But I'll come back to the tools and resources. I think it's a relatively easy thing to do. And it may sometimes for some communication teams be the only thing that they really have control over. They don't have control over the hiring practices. They may not be able to institute the training, but they certainly can provide tools and resources to help managers to think more strategically about how they do their communication and to help them be more successful in engaging their teams in dialogue.
Wonderful. Jim.
Yes, I think that communication people need to have a better understanding, for the most part, of what communicates in an organization as it relates to the leadership. And I'm not suggesting that newsletters aren't useful and video isn't useful, but as I teach leaders about what people pay attention to, the data is pretty clear here that how you use your time, what you take the lead on, the questions you ask, like Irv Hockaday before, and you are what you reward. And if you are signaling to people what's important through how they use their time, what they take the lead on day after day, the questions you ask, like Irv did, and how you reward people, you're communicating what needs to be done to make this a better organization. And I think communication people need to appreciate that and help teach their leaders how to do that better.
Great. Bish?
Yeah, I think a few things here, as already mentioned by the three earlier speakers. One is the effort that we need to make to communicate up and down the line. And that is a very big effort that you need to make, because you sometimes come across bosses who are just impossible. I had one boss who was always sitting in his room watching the football, and he was very, very fond of one particular player. He bought his book and he was sitting and reading it. And if you go and disturb him and tell him what communication practices you're doing down the line or up the ladder or whatever, he wouldn't be bothered. He'll say, okay, come later. You know what? So it was a difficult one. There are bosses, there are employees, there are subordinates who are more amenable to change and ideas, and we should make the full use of it. And of course, measurement, accountability, these are pillars, and the attachment to the bottom line of the company. Thank you.
Great. And Roger, what would be your one tip for communicators?
It would be two words, advocacy and collaboration. The subject is bigger than any one function by any measure that you can think of. So we need to collaborate with our HR partners. We need to collaborate with other staff people and drive this as a total cultural initiative in organizations.
Absolutely.
And I think communication people have shied away from this subject and instead focused on media and things like that. I think this is the subject of the times.
Great. And again, the book is Bosses, True Stories of the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Excellent book. I have shared it with multiple people. I
got to go get one.
I've got... Roger, I've got the autograph copy you sent me. I'm very grateful. I also bought several and have distributed them, and I have it on my Kindle.
Good.
So I want to thank everybody for joining us live for this and thank the panel. It's been a lot of fun. I know I say this on virtually every one of these Circle of Fellows, but this could have gone on another couple of hours. We barely scratched the surface. I do want to let everyone know that the next Circle of Fellows, episode number 56, will be on Thursday, April 16th. I may still be working from home on Thursday, April 16th. It's on leading change and creating a high-performance leadership environment. So there's a thread here that continues into the April topic. Joining us will be Priya Bates, Amanda Hamilton Atwell, Ned Lundquist, and Stacy, you'll be back with us for that one. So
that's right.
Looking forward to that very much. You may notice that behind me is the Chicago skyline. That is because the IABC World Conference in early June is in Chicago. I checked this morning. It is still on as of right now. So I plan to be there. If it's still happening, I will make every effort to be at that conference. It's a wonderful conference, and I would urge those of you watching and listening to check that out. With any luck at all, we'll be over the hump and able to convene again by early June. And with that, I want to wish everybody health and safety. Please follow the rules, and we'll see you all next month. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Anna, thank you.
Yes, definitely. Big thanks to Anna Willie for all the behind-the-scenes planning on this.
Absolutely.
See you next month.